Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. Thank you all for being here. So today's workshop, as you all, I'm sure, obviously know, we're going to be focusing on writing academic statements, CVs, and letters of recommendation. In terms of, actually, we can do intros first instead. Um, yeah, decide. So, hello everyone. My name is Enrica, and I am a fifth year communication and media and developmental psychology PhD candidate at the University of Michigan.
And hi everyone, I'm Katie. I'm a third year PhD student in political psychology at NYU in New York.
All right, Katie, I actually didn't know if you wanted to do the slide or if I could, I'll just do it.
Oh,
I can do
okay. Yeah, I don't remember if we, okay,
it.
I'll just say, yeah. So
Yeah.
before we get started, just so you guys know, you can access these materials later. We're going to be recording this and posting it later. And the slides will be on Google Drive. So fear not, if you can't stay the whole time, you'll have access to everything. And yeah, we can just go ahead and get started. So we'll start with just writing your general statement. So first, we'll start with what's called the research statement. So the research statement, which is also called the statement of purpose, has a few elements that you should make sure that you include. So first, you'll want to include past research experience, especially if it's relevant to your current interests. So make sure you don't just list things here like you would in a CV, which we'll talk about later. It'll be better if you kind of, as you're discussing your research experience, also kind of talk about the skills that you learned as you were kind of engaging in that research. Also, if you have a lot of research experience, with which some people do, especially if you kind of have a lot of research experience across different topics or different labs, it'll be best for you to pick the most relevant research experiences to the ones that your interests that that you want to pursue in graduate school. Um, After that, you'll want to discuss your current interests and the research that you would like to pursue in the future. Um, Sometimes people will even kind of list a few specific research questions. They don't have to be like a research plan or anything crazy, but just something kind of displaying to the reader that you kind of know the field. And then people that you want to work with and why. So this is usually in the last paragraph, and we recommend that you probably list this even if the prompt doesn't ask for it. Um, it's just good to kind of connect your own interests to those of the school and like what the people there are doing, and it kind of shows the fit between your interests and the school that you're applying to if you can demonstrate that you are aware of what's going on there. Also, kind of depending on the program, you'll have to actually like pick who your primary advisor would be on your application. I know that was true. For me, when I applied, I actually had to list who I wanted my primary advisor to be. So you would definitely, especially if you list a primary advisor or a secondary advisor, discuss why you would want to work with them in your actual research statement. And then lastly, professional goals. So what do you want to do with your degree? What do you hope to contribute both to science and society? Who do you want to work with? Like what populations you maybe want to work with in the future? What, if you want to stay in academia. Yeah, if not, those will be good things to discuss so that you can kind of communicate what you want to do with your degree once you have it. So now just a few tips on like to remember while you're writing your research statement and refining it. So don't just list what's on your CV. So kind of alluded to that earlier. Although there will be overlap. So don't worry if there's overlap. That's normal. What you don't want it to be is just your CV in like paragraph form. So you want to be a little bit more specific about your experiences and kind of weave in those experiences into your narrative more. Um, Oops. So if you've done research projects, right, pick a few to talk about that are most relevant to the work you do in graduate school. We already said that. And then, yeah, right. If you cram too much, it'll sound listy. And then again, tailoring each statement to the program. And this is usually done in that last paragraph. The last thing is make sure that you double check the name of the program and the professors that you list are correct. Because if you are applying to Columbia or something and you accidentally say, I really want to go to Purdue because it's like an auto, they automatically throw your application in the trash can because it shows that you're not paying attention to detail. And then also, you're obviously not really communicating to them why you want to go to Columbia. You're communicating why you want to go to Purdue. And this has happened. I know people who've done this, and it's really upsetting once you find out that you forgot to change a name or you like submitted the wrong thing. So just like double, triple check everything. Um, okay. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I am admitting more people. Okay, so we are now going to chat a bit about elements of a personal statement. Katie, can you put up the first bullet point? Thanks. So even though this essay is called a personal statement, try not to get overly personal. Um, you might have to like think about what you want to talk about in terms of the experiences you want to talk about, and you might want to like chat with a couple people about like, hey, do you think this is like personal enough? Do you think this is too personal, and kind of like weigh it out? And if folks have questions about like, hey, I want to talk about this thing, but I don't know if it's overly personal or not, we can like chat about that during Q&A. And the second thing is you should mainly focus on talking about your personal reasons for wanting to pursue a master's or PhD. You can also talk about challenges you face and what you have overcome to get to where you are. Sometimes that will be listed as something to talk about in the prompt, but if it's not, know that that is something that you can chat about. And then what you write for the statement may mirror things you may write for your diversity statement. So Katie and I are not going to be talking about diversity statements today, but there will be a future project short workshop that'll be all about diversity statements. So you can get more info on like what you can include and cannot include, or should include and should not include in the diversity statement. And maybe I'll probably also get tips on what you can say for the diversity statement or what you should mainly include in the personal statement. And then some example points that you can potentially mention in your personal statement if you are comfortable doing so. You totally don't have to, but these are just some options. These are also things that I kind of talked about in mine when I applied a couple years ago. So one is being a first generation graduate student. You can also talk about your cultural background, such as like your race, ethnicity, immigrant status, etc. Again, as long as you're comfortable, but you don't have to. If you are a non-traditional student, such as like if you were a parent that went back to get their PhD after raising children, or if you're someone who like after you graduated undergrad, like you went and had a whole like amazing career for like a bunch of years before deciding to go back to grad school, you should totally talk about that and know that you can talk about that. If you are a low income student, you could also mention that in your statement. Um, and then I think there's one last one. Again, like I said before, you can also talk about any challenges or obstacles you have faced to get to where you are that you feel like really make sense for your narrative and something that you really want to convey to admissions committees. And then this next slide, we have some like example personal statement prompts. So the first one on the left is the personal statement prompt from the University of Michigan Psychology PhD program. This is one that I actually had to write when I was applying there. So basically, at least what Michigan wants, you kind of get a sense that, for instance, they said this should be a statement about how your personal background and life experiences, including social, cultural, familial, educational, and other opportunities or challenges, motivate your decision to pursue a graduate degree at the University of Michigan. And then they go on to say this is not an academic statement of purpose or like a research statement like Katie was talking about. But a discussion of your personal journey that has led to your decision to seek a graduate degree. Um, so that, for instance, is what like Michigan State Department is looking for. And you can see that like the different language that they use in terms of what they're looking for. And then the one right underneath that one, hold on, let me admit somebody else. Okay, the one right underneath that one is from UCLA's sociology PhD program. And as you can see, they are kind of looking for something similar-ish. So they said, while the statement of purpose is about your work, your personal statement is about you and how you'll contribute to the diversity of ideas at UCLA. The personal statement is an opportunity for you to provide additional information that may aid the selection committee in evaluating your preparation and aptitude for grad study at UCLA. And then the one to the right of those two is from UC Berkeley's graduate admissions. So this one, I tried to look for one initially that was, or we tried to look for one initially that was program specific, but the one that we ended up including and found is just one for like general grad admissions. And so they mention that the personal statement should give concrete evidence for your promise as a member of the academic community, giving the committee an image of you as a person. So kind of similar to what the other two kind of ask for. Again, you can talk about your potential to bring your academic career critical perspective rooted in non-traditional educational background, like we mentioned before, or your understanding of the experience of groups historically underrepresented in higher ed and your commitment to increase participation by a diverse population in higher ed. So at least for Berkeley, they're also telling you that you can talk about like, hey, if like one of your goals, like while you're in grad school, is to like mentor folks and like you want to help, like for instance, like diversify academia, you can like mention that if that is relevant to you in the statement. And then they also go on to like give a little blurb about like what you can talk about in the statement. So they said communication skills, anything that shows your promise, initiative, and ability to persevere despite obstacles. If you face any obstacles, if one part, oh yeah, and they also mentioned at the end, if one part of your academic record is maybe not the best, so like let's say your GPA is maybe not necessarily where you wanted it to be, they did say that that is a place where you can address that and talk about that. So obviously there are many, many examples for what programs look like in terms of personal statements and what prompts can look like. But I will say, when I applied to 8 programs, and I would say they all pretty much were very similar to the screenshots on the slide. So you can expect to see this. And I have, well, all the links are listed on the side as you can see. And then also one thing to note is that you can also, where you find all the personal statement prompts, there's also a section for like statement of purpose or research statement prompts. You can also see what folks are looking for, but I would say they're pretty much looking for like all the stuff that Katie mentioned earlier. So yeah. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, and then we also wanted to talk a bit about crafting a narrative. So not just for like the personal statement, but generally for all the statements that you write. So one of the things that you want to think about is content. So what are the key experiences you want to cover? And thinking about like, okay, one thing about the message that you want the admissions committees to know about you, and then what are the key experiences that you feel like convey that message, is the first one. And then the next one is theming. So going back to what I just said, what central or general message do you want to convey about who you are? Like when people read your statements, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to get a sense of about you? So think about that too when you're writing your statements. And then the next one is transition. So how does each piece of content build towards your central theme? And you should emphasize that at the start and end of each section. So when you, like, for instance, when Katie mentioned, like, if you have a lot of research experience, you likely, because of word limits, you might not be able to talk about all the research that you've done. And even if you can talk about all the research that you've done, you might just want to talk about one main project, or if you want to talk about 2 main projects, because you feel like these are 2 projects that I feel like really represent maybe the work I want to do in grad school, represent who I am as a scholar currently. So that's something you also want to think about. And then the next one is inclusion. So how does your central theme serve the interests of your audience? Your audience in this case is generally a bunch of professors on an admissions committee, and they kind of tell you what they're interested in and what they're looking for through like the statement prompts. So kind of you should also be thinking about, well, how does your overall theme that you want to convey with your statements, how does that go along with or coincide with what the admissions committees are looking for? And then the last one is the intro hook. So, what's an anecdote that portrays your theme and your personality? Now, I will say, many people have a lot of thoughts on whether you should include a hook in intro or not. Katie and I were talking about this when we were working on these slides about our opinions on that. Personally, I think if there is a hook and there is an experience that really like undergirds the reason why you want to do grad school, I would include it. I had a hook in mind, and I don't know. I think as long as it is a relevant experience, you should go for it. My rationale is admissions committees are sometimes looking at hundreds of applications, and I feel like having a hook at the beginning that is relevant helps you to stand out. Now, if it's a hook where it's like, I wanted to be a doctor since I was 3, maybe necessarily say that just because I feel like a lot of people are probably going to say that. But if there's like a specific like experience that you had, that again, that feels like it conveys your overall message that and that it's relevant, I would include it. That's also something you might want to workshop with other people. Like, hey, I want to include this hook. What do you think? But I think it also ultimately comes down to style. If you're just like, I just want to get straight to it, I just want to like get to writing, that's also fine. A hook is not a requirement. But in my N of one opinion, I think hooks can be good.
Yeah, so totally agree. I'm also a hook person. It definitely makes it more interesting. But yeah, so now kind of more specifically looking at what programs want to see that you should try to communicate through your writing. So first we touched on this a little bit earlier, and it's definitely going to come out most in the research portion of what you write is an general understanding of the field. You want to show basically that you kind of have a broad understanding of the field and how your research is addressing existing gaps. And this does not have to be too specific at all, right? Like you are at the very beginning of your career. You don't need to be like writing a dissertation level like research statement. Again, this is kind of all happening in that last paragraph about like what you really want to do in the future. The main thing that you don't want to do, right, is to like uh propose a research topic that like people in the field have known the answer to for forever, right? So I think you just want to just kind of display a general understanding of what's going on in the field. Also, you want to communicate a general cultural and interest match with the program. So, including details about the program, strengths that match your own interests in subfields or careers. So you could talk about, you know, the specific kind of training that they offer that you feel like you couldn't get it somewhere else, you know, the equipment that they have. I know like at NYU, we have like a bunch of MRI machines that people use a lot that aren't necessarily available at other schools. Communities that you could work with. So depending really on the area in which the school is located. You know, if you're doing like medical research, you could discuss potential hospitals or hospitals associated with the school that you think would provide good training to you. And again, specific professors, right? If a specific professor has a certain skill set that you know that you could learn from them, you could definitely talk about that. Uh, Last thing is self-starting and self-directed behavior. And basically what this means is taking ownership of what you've worked on and how you have carved your own path. So you kind of want to show readers, right, that your work ethic and your drive has kind of led you to seek out these opportunities that have prepared you for graduate school. But you want to make sure you're striking a balance, right? You don't want to come off as too overconfident. But one example that I think about a lot is just kind of in the way that you uh, frame like your language, how your language is framed generally. Sorry, I couldn't get that out. A lot of people try to be really like passive, I guess, to try to like not come off as too overconfident. So one example that like one of my advisors would always say that all of her students did would be like, um, when you're talking about your research experience, often people will say, Dr. So and so let me work in their lab. Instead of saying, like what you actually did, which was you applied and were accepted into the lab, right? So that kind of is more active language that shows that you kind of pursued that and you applied and you got it, instead of, someone just being really nice and letting you into their lab. Um, so yeah, you just kind of want to use language, with balance, but use language that kind of emphasizes your accomplishments. Sorry, this clicker is like. Anyway, does anybody have any questions on writing research and personal statements before we move on? Or did anyone write anything in the comments? It's like kind of hard for me to see.
I don't
Um,
think so. But yeah,
I
feel
think I have,
free. Oh, sorry.
sorry, I think I have a quick question. It's like because I saw on a few schools' websites, they said, you're welcome to mention what gaps you saw in the current field. So yeah, I wonder how specific we should mention that, and or we just use one sentence to mention, oh, there is a gap between the discipline and the current symptoms or something like that, or should we go a little bit more detail?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's pretty cool that the school like actually mentioned that you could discuss more like specifically the research gap that you wanted to fill. Yeah, I would definitely say more than one sentence on that. I would definitely like integrate it more into the last section of your statement where you're really discussing what you want to do in the future. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that if the prompt is asking you to focus a lot on what you want to do in the future, you could probably make that part a little bit longer. Sometimes prompts will be like, we want to hear a lot more about what you've done in the past and how your experiences have prepped you for graduate school. Then, you would want to spend a lot of time describing that. But it seems like if that prompt is more future focused, you could probably keep the same structure. I'm not telling you to rewrite it, but like maybe you could put have that last paragraph be a little bit longer where you go into a little bit more detail about the gaps that you want to fill in the field.
And
Okay.
then, yeah, I totally agree with Katie. And then another thing is that, like, depending on how long the prompts are, like, let's say it's 500 words, if you don't have as much space and there's other stuff you're talking about, one thing that I did is that when I listed out the professors I wanted to work with, instead of mentioning like, oh, this person does something related to what I want to do, and that's why I want to work with them, what I did, which is actually a tip that I got from a grad student that I knew that I worked with as mentor, that one way to do it is that you can talk about how you want to extend or expand the work of this particular advisor. So you can be like, oh, like I want to work with this person and expand their research in this way. So if you have like a limited amount of space, that is also one way to do it too, or another way to do it.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
that's
Very helpful.
that's really great advice. And actually, I would probably say to do that even if they don't ask what gaps you're
Mhm.
going to fill. That's good advice.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to like write it in the chat, or you can always like unmute and ask your question.
Okay, maybe we'll move on. We'll have like more time for questions. So like if something arises, feel free. We'll have another pause and then we have more time at the end too. So,
I have a question if that's
oh
okay.
yeah, go
Uh,
ahead.
so if we have our past experience has like research in different areas, like not necessarily the areas we want to apply to, how do we make the whole story coherent, like by talking about research in like absolutely different areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a quick follow-up question. Is it that like the program that you're in now or like the work that you did, was it in a different program than the one you want to apply to, or is it the same field, but you just want to do different research than what you've done previously?
Mm, like some of my like undergrad research was in completely different fields because I just didn't have anyone in the field I wanted to apply to. But then like there's more relevant research afterwards. But not like exactly the same either. So but some studies were like more close to what I want to study in PhD and others weren't because that was like what was given at the time. So um, yeah.
I would probably talk about your more relevant research, versus talking about the ones that are less relevant. Um, is probably my guess. The reason why I asked the follow-up question is because the one of the programs that I'm in now, that was not in my undergrad degree was not in that subject at all. So my undergrad degree is in psych, and one of the programs that I'm in now is a communication and media program, of which my undergrad degree is not in. So a lot of my experiences, or some of my research projects didn't necessarily have anything to do with media, but I was kind of like able to tie it in. So I would say probably lean more on talking about your more relevant research. Although, like if there is a way for you to maybe connect the research that's less relevant to what's relevant, or yeah, if you can do that, I would also recommend doing that. But I think my thought would be to lean more on the one that's relevant. It's totally okay if it's not like the exact thing that you want to do. Because I think, yeah, there are some folks who like have previous research and exactly what they want to do now, but I feel like for many people that's not necessarily the case. Like for me, it was similar that like I had relevant and related research experience, but I wasn't doing the exact thing that I'm doing now. So I think you should talk about um the research experience that is like closest, I would say. It's totally fine if it's not the exact same thing, but yeah. Katie, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, you can definitely still mention that early research, but not spend too much time on it just because like it's your life story. What you can definitely focus on more is like whether there are any um kind of skills you learned. So like even like if I like I'm in psychology right now, but if I like started in a different field, but I'd still learned a little bit about data analysis or something like that, I could say, I learned while I was studying this, I learned about data analysis, and then in the next paragraph, you can be like, as I progressed through undergrad or master's or whatever, I like developed an interest in blah blah blah. You make it a little bit more interesting
Yeah.
and like leave it with your narrative, and then you'd be like, I sought out this opportunity, blah blah blah. And then you get like, closer to the thing that you want. And then, yeah, I would say like 95% of people, their past experiences don't align 100% with what they want to do. So it's like very normal. You just kind of like, sometimes it's chronological, sometimes it's not, but you can just kind of like weave a narrative of how you like started developing your interest, your current interests, I guess. Does that kind of help? I will say though, like, don't be worried because this is like super natural, like, or not natural, normal. I don't know, I said natural, normal. That like, yeah, I mean, when you're just starting, like, oftentimes people will just get in or do research experiences before they even really know what their interests are. And like it doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile or you didn't learn something from it. So I think it's definitely still worth mentioning, but like yeah, spending more time on like the more relevant stuff.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm. Anybody else? Other questions about writing statements as of right now? Again, we could always come back to it later if a question pops up, but
Yeah. Okay. We'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the writing process, which is like always seems really scary. but we're going to help you not make it that scary. So first things first is develop an organizational plan, and you have to do this even if you hate it. I really hate developing an organizational plan, but it really helps. So what I really like doing is that I set a timeline for myself, and I usually share it with someone else. So even if they're not actually the one who's going to hold me accountable, I know that I've shared it with somebody else. And I usually share it with one of my mentors. So if you have a mentor or even like a friend, someone who has your schedule that you want to follow, just so that you know that like you're not the only person who knows you have to stick to this timeline. So things that you might put in this timeline for yourself are: by when do you want a first draft of each of these statements? When do you want to send out a draft for feedback? How many rounds of revisions should you plan on? I would say at least 3 rounds of major revisions. And major revisions means possibly rewriting it. In terms of structure and whatever. I mean, your life doesn't change like that you're like lying about what's going on, but like clearly, narratives can shift with feedback. Um, so after that, the first step is to just get words on the page. And any words are good. So we would say literally word vomit, which is totally fine. And actually, like, so much more helpful than you think it would be if you try to make your sentence perfect before you've really even written something. You're going to be so stuck. Um, Literally, like, bullet points is fine. You can do voice memos. I've like written introductions to papers using voice memos. Um, yeah, at this point, you don't want to overthink this stage at all, because if you do, you're gonna have writer's block. So just get stuff down. Um, After that, after you just like word vomit for a few days, maybe a little bit longer, then you kind of start to create an outline from what you've written. So you can kind of start moving things around. It can still totally be in bullet points. I like to kind of make a topic sentence and underline it for where I think the paragraphs are going to go. So you're basically just like taking baby steps at this point still, which really helps you kind of um, begin to craft your narrative. So yeah, then you kind of fill out this outline until you have what looks like a first draft. And then you rework that draft on your own, but not for too long, because then you'll get in your head. And then you'll get feedback and plan again for at least a few rounds of major revisions, plus probably some smaller revisions as well. So I think when you break things down in this way, it really helps. Obviously, everyone kind of has their own process that works for them. But I think that most people would agree that getting words on a page is better than not getting words on a page. Um, so yeah, more kind of tips on this. Starting early, which is like now, if you are planning on submitting in, I think the earliest deadlines are November 15th. So if you're trying to apply this round, I would definitely start right now. If you're planning on applying next year, I think early October is a good time to start thinking about what you're going to write. Stick to word count, but don't let it limit your early drafts. It's always much easier to cut than to add. I think that, like, along with kind of the word vomiting idea, that you just want to get all of your ideas down, and you're often going to be like super wordy in your first drafts anyway. So you'll find that, like, 3 sentences can really be cut down to one, but it's important that you got all of those sentences down in the first place, right? Um, Avoid flowery cliche language like the word passionate, although some people still use passionate and it's It's fine. I think you hear this a lot with anytime you're writing anything, but you really want to kind of show above tell, so showing through like concrete examples of your research experience. But again, right, like you can still tell, but don't only tell. So like you can use the word passionate, but don't use passionate plus like five other synonyms of passionate in the same paragraph or something like that. Um, yeah, read aloud feature in Microsoft Word to help your work be read back to you to kind of make sure it's making sense. It's super easy to miss things when reading over our own writing when it comes to sentence structure, grammar, typos. Um, yeah, when you look at something a million times, it's difficult. And then edit a lot, build in time for many rounds of edits, large and small. I think this is like good advice for all like academic writing that you do in the future, particularly when you have a lot of co-authors. A lot of people are going to have a lot of different opinions about what should be in there and what shouldn't be in there. So it's good to kind of like not have such a strong emotional tie to your first draft of things. And then, yeah, getting feedback, preferably from someone who reads graduate applications and or has applied before. So your letter writers are a great resource, and they actually will probably want to see a draft of your personal and research statements either way. Your project short mentors are a great resource. And lastly, I kind of just want to note too that it's normal to get a lot of feedback. Um, and when you get a lot of feedback, like if someone sends something back and there's like 50 comments on it, you should definitely be like thankful over being offended. And I think it's also something you definitely need to get used to. Like, um, whenever I like write anything and I send it to my advisor, it comes back and there's like barely any of my original words on there anymore. So it means that someone was willing to spend time on giving you feedback, and people are super busy. So it kind of shows that they really care and they're committed to you accomplishing your goals. Um, yeah. Okay.
Okay, now we're going to jump into CVs and resumes. But really quick, I just want to co-sign what Katie said. Well, everything that Katie said, but especially the last point about like when you get a lot of feedback. Yeah, I've definitely had moments, especially when I first started, when you see a lot of like the red ink or a lot of comments, and you kind of want to bang your head into a wall a little bit because it's like, why are there so many comments? But yeah, like Katie said, that like in my experience, it's also like the folks who give you a lot of comments, like they really care and they want you to have the best possible like statement and application that you can have, and the feedback's gonna help you get there. And one thing that's helped me is that like I constantly tell myself, I forgot where I heard this from, but I heard this from somewhere that like when you get feedback, it's not like it's not feedback on you as a person. It's just like on your writing. But oftentimes when you're like academics in your research, you feel it like they're tied to who you are. It's kind of sometimes really hard to disentangle that. I've had to work on disentangling that. Um, so yeah, just wanted to like plus one what Katie said. Okay, so now for CVs and resumes. So a CV or a curriculum vitae or vitae is slightly different from a resume in a few ways. Next bullet point, Katie.
Sorry, I like my clicker is somewhere else all the time, and anyway, go ahead.
That's totally fine. And then one point is that like the reason why we're talking a little bit about the differences between CVs and resumes, and I'll get to this after too, is that some programs ask for one or the other. So that's why we're talking a little bit about the difference between the two. But anyways, so CVs mainly focus on your academic and non-academic accomplishments related to your field from undergrad onward. And then CVs are usually as long as you need them to be, whereas resumes, from what I've heard, you kind of usually try to keep them to one page. And then, like I said before, some programs allow prospective students or applicants to submit CVs or resumes. Between the two, I would say that you probably should send your CV instead, mainly because like obviously like you're applying to an academic program and they're more likely, I think, gonna want to see a CV. I don't necessarily think it throws you out of the running if you submit a resume, but I would try to um turn your resume into a CV personally. So if they ask you for either or, I would personally probably just submit a CV. And if you just have a resume, I would work on translating your resume into a CV. Okay, next slide, Katie. Okay, so now I'm just gonna blab on for a couple minutes about all of the various like sections that you can include in a CV because there are many sections that you can include. The first being like general things like your name and contact information, such as like your home school address, your email address, your phone number, things like that. You can also include your education. So, for instance, schools attended, degrees earned, Latin honors, such as like magna cum laude, summa cum laude, all those things, and maybe your GPA. I've seen folks who include their GPA and folks who didn't. I think when I applied, I don't think I had mine on my CV, or maybe I did. I would say that that one's more optional. You can include it. If you have a solid GPA and you want to include it, you can, but I don't think you necessarily have to. So whatever your preference is. And then research interest, I would say this is optional. Some folks have what they're generally interested in on their CV, some don't. So again, you can try out both and see how you feel, but you don't necessarily have to include that if you don't want to. And then any honors and awards, such as like if you've gotten any scholarships or fellowship or any like Dean's List recognition, you can include that there. And then any publications, if you have any, include the citations. If you don't have any, that's also totally fine. But yeah, if you have any publications, I would just like, yeah, include the citations. And then for more CV section, because as I said, there are many. One of the biggest things that you definitely want to include is your research experience. So, for instance, including like short bullet points about the project you worked on and any roles or tasks that you completed for the project would be good to include. Ooh, there is a question. Hold on. Would you want to include Dean's List if it's from a community college? Yeah, I would. I think you totally should. Yeah. I would also include the community college as part of like your education section. But yeah, I would totally include the Dean's List if it's from a community college. Katie, I don't know if you have another thought, but yeah, that's I would say yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would too. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and then any research presentations that you have. So, for example, if you have any poster presentations, you can include like the citation for that, any like talks or like oral talks, any if you've presented at a conference, whether it's like a national, international, whatever, you can talk about that. If you like presented on anything, like for instance, like a science day, like at your institution or in your program, you can include those too. Another question. Okay. Would you include the associate's degree from the community college in your CV in addition to your bachelor's? Yeah, I probably would. Yeah, and I see Katie's also nodding. Yeah, I probably would in the education section. Yeah, I would. I would include both. And then works in progress. So I would say there's not optional isn't listed there, but I would say this might also be a little bit optional. Like if you are working on projects or like projects that are like in preparation that you want to talk about, especially ones that like maybe related to the work that you want to do in grad school, I'd maybe mention it. I didn't have a works in progress section when I applied. I have it on my CV like now, but I didn't have it when I applied. So I would say this one's probably also optional. And then any like leadership, volunteered work experience that you had. So my recommendation would be to include it if it's for sure if it's related to your field, if it's relevant to your research, and then if it's not related, if it's something that's noteworthy, or if it's something that you feel like helped you gain a lot of great skills, which is something that you'd probably talk about in your this probably might lean more towards your personal statement. So if you talk about like this job, which may not be related, but I learned a lot of great skills that I think will serve me well as a grad student, you could include those. And then a couple more sections. If you have any teaching and mentoring experience or teaching and mentoring experience, you should totally include that. If you don't have that, that is again totally fine. But if you have been like an undergrad, like if you help or like as an undergrad, you like helped run a class or you like have mentor students for like a program or something like that, I would totally mention that. And then any relevant skills such as stats and coding. I know skills tend to be more so on a resume than a CV, but I have seen people put skills on their CV and I would say like, yeah, if you're like hella good at stats and coding, that'll be great because you're gonna probably be doing, depending on your program and field, you're probably doing a lot of stats and coding. So if folks see that you already are like really good at it, I think that's a really good look. And then any professional membership, specifically if they're field related. So for instance, if you were or are a psychology undergrad and you're like a member of a division for the American Psychological Association or something like that, you can feel free to include that. And then I think this might be the last one. So references, so the names and contact information of your recommendation letter writers. I have optional here because you can or cannot. It could be helpful just for like all of your references to be in one place on your CV. You don't necessarily have to, but you can. So yeah, so we have optional here. I think those are most of them. So yeah, and then some CV writing tips. Um, so similar to something that we talked about before about avoiding all flowery language, CV should get right to the point. You should just talk about the experience. Anything that you want to expand on, you can expand on in like your research statement, but pretty much for the CV, you just get right to the point of what you are talking about. And then, as we've said with every other statement, edit, 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 have other people look at it as many times as you can. I cannot tell you how many times I've like reread my CV, could have sworn there was no typos, and then had somebody look at it or look at it again and there was a typo. And I'm like, I've literally read this document like 50 times. How did I miss that? But sometimes when you read a document too much, it's like, oh no, I need somebody else to put their eyeballs on this that are not my eyeballs. But yeah, and then if you're not really sure what you want yours to look like, and I think especially if you've never written a CV before, or if you're like, for instance, like translating your resume into a CV, one recommendation is to try looking up the CVs of professors and grad students in your field to get some ideas. So this doesn't always happen, but on program websites, some professors will have their like CV there where you can download it and like look at it, and grad students, same thing. Some grad students, not all, for instance, I don't have mine on my program's websites. I need to add it, but I don't have mine currently. But grad students also will sometimes have their CVs so you can kind of get a sense of what yours could look like. Obviously, like it might look a little bit different in length and also structure because um they may be in the field for a little bit longer, especially professors. Sometimes they have like 40-page CVs, and when you apply, you're not necessarily going to have a 40-page CV. I don't think, unless you do, but like yeah. So one tip is to look at the CVs of professors and grad students in your field or even like an adjacent field to get some ideas on how yours can look. And then as a follow-up point, looking at other CVs may also help you figure out how you want to order the sections of your CVs. There's many a discourse on how you should order it. There are folks who are like, you should have your honors and awards higher up. There are other folks that are like your research experience and any publications, presentations should be higher up. Research interest can be lower. I don't necessarily think there's a right or wrong way to like order stuff on a CV, but I think when you look at the CVs of other folks, it might give you a sense of like, oh, this person has, especially if you can, or if you like know grad students, like if you're currently in a lab and you like are in a lab, like they're grad students there, you can maybe ask if they're willing, the grad students in your lab, if they're willing to share, if they have it, if they're willing to share the version of their CV that they used when they applied. So if they have that copy, they might be able to share it with you. So for instance, if anyone's applying to psych programs, I have a copy of my CV from when I applied, and I'm super happy to share it if that's helpful. But yeah, so again, looking at other people's CVs, especially even folks who are like maybe like closer to you in terms of years. So if it's like a first year, second year, it might be good. So all in all, looking at other ones can be helpful. A lot of what my CV looks like now and when I applied, it's because I looked at other people's. So that is one recommendation. And then this is just a link to an article about how to write a clear, compelling CV that was written a couple years ago, but it was written by a couple of professors that I looked at it a couple times and I thought it was helpful. So we just included that as well. And then, okay, so we are going to take another pause for questions. So does anyone have questions on like crafting CVs or any questions about like general writing tips or even about like other maybe stuff from earlier too? Again, feel free to write in the chat or just unmute and ask your question. Going once, going twice.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yep.
So on the CV for research experiences, if you are going to describe a certain experiences and how specific should it be? Because I know some people are like recommended to be very specific, like okay, like even like quantify some numbers to show like what you've done. So just like question about, like how specific should it be?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, I would probably make it as specific as you can. Like, you don't necessarily have to like talk about the results of the study or anything, but I would say if you're talking about like the research design, like I like examined like, okay, I'm just gonna give an example of something that I mentioned in mine, but like I examined like 50 like children's animated films looking at these different things. And then so like you want to give like enough of an idea of what the project was about. So yeah, feel free to like quantify if you were like doing a survey with like let's say 100 participants, like you can mention that it was with 100 participants. You don't necessarily have to, but it could be good to like quantify it. And then when you talk about like your roles and the tasks that you did, you can be specific about like, oh, I helped with the literature review. Oh, I helped with like data analysis. I helped with putting together the questions, things like that. So I would say, yeah, I would probably make it more specific. But what do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And yeah, you can like be specific. And I should have actually mentioned this in the research statement. You can be specific about the research question that was like being asked. You don't necessarily have to mention the results. But I would say like you can mention and maybe should mention results and it doesn't have to be in depth, but it can just be a like a sentence or whatever in your research statement. Like you don't want to be like, oh, we looked at the difference between like this group and this group on this outcome in your research statement. You should probably say like, and we found this,
Yeah.
but you don't have to because otherwise the reader's left wondering and also like I don't know, but unless it's still ongoing, then you can say that. But for the CV itself, yeah, you can just be like literature review for a project that examined differences on this between these two groups, like something like that. And yeah, numbers is fine if yeah, like if you coded a lot of responses or like if you're doing like a meta-analysis, this is an example, and you had to read like a bunch of papers, like you can say like, I read 100 papers for this meta-analysis because that's like an insane amount of work to do.
It,
In
yeah.
terms of, yeah, in terms of like statistics numbers, like not necessary. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I would agree. No, probably no stats. But yeah, if you, like Katie said, if you like read 100 articles or if you like coded a bunch of responses, I think for mine, I coded over 400 like parental responses. So I wrote that. So like if it's like that, totally write it. But yeah, again, what Katie said, not necessarily not talking about the results in the CV, but definitely talking about it in the research statement, just because people might very well want to know. And if it's a topic that's related to like their work, they may like even more so like want to know the results. But yeah, we hope that helps.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you. And I can have a follow-up question. It
Mhm.
applies to both CV and statements too. Um, is that so a lot of work that I'm doing, I want to apply for clinical psychology, and a lot of work I'm doing on clinical trials are a collaboration between a lot of people. So I was wondering like how to handle like a collaborative work, like for example, using words like contributed to or like helped with in CV, and how to balance that kind of like the language in the statements as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, what you just said is perfect, like contributed to, helped with. Um, like most research, especially at this stage, is collaborative,
Mhm.
and like very few fields even do eventually like do independent work. Like I know very few, like maybe sometimes in political science is a like later in your career, like after you're a professor, you would do some independent work. But definitely in most fields, it's very collaborative, so that's like totally fine. If you um if you did like an independent project, which like usually still means there was like a PI on it, so it's still collaborative, you can use language that like makes it clear that you're like the first author, right? Like in my honors thesis, I was interested in asking this question with my mentor, Dr. So and so. We did this, this, and this, so that like it's, clear that you kind of like took initiative on that specific project versus like, some other projects you can be like, I contributed to this project or whatever. Also, I would say like if you have uh any independent re or like first author research is probably the better word. I would definitely list that as work in preparation on your CV. So it kind of like makes it clear also that you're the first author and also like who else is on it. Like um, you know, it might be just your PI, but it might also be another few graduate students or whatever. So I think yeah, you can just contributed to, helped out with is like fine for things where you're not the first author, maybe you're not an author at all, which is also totally normal for being a research assistant. And then you can use kind of different language when you're talking about independent work. Does that kind of like, or first author led work, does that kind of like help out with that?
Yeah. I think that's a good way to phrase it.
And then on that note, I just had a thought while Katie was talking. One thing that you might also want to do, I would say this is more optional, but it's related to like the CV. Yeah, if you've done an honors thesis, I would also include that on your CV, specifically like when you talk about your education, so you're talking about like your degrees and stuff. Like let's say like you did like a bachelor's like honors thesis, like underneath, well, when you do your education, and then you can also mention, if you did an honors thesis, you can mention your advisor's name and then also like the title of the honors thesis. Again, optional, but that is one thing that you um can also do. Like an honors thesis is of course not required, but I think folks do like want to know like if you did one. So that's also another place to include that. But yeah, and I also co-sign like everything Katie said too. Um, and then we have another question. Should we list expired certifications like human subjects research to showcase we have done it in the past or only new ones? Um, I get, I don't know. Cause I mean, maybe you could. I'm like going back and forth because my first thought is to be like just talk about the ones that are like current, but I also think it could be good, like if even though they're expired, you could show that like Hamptons in the past. But I guess you don't necessarily have to say they're expired. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know. I mean, you're gonna have to redo it either way, like whatever
Yeah.
institution you end up at. So I feel like it's like something like human subjects, I feel training people probably don't even usually list. You can if you want to.
Yeah.
Um, if you have other trainings that are like, I don't know, like CPR training or something, I wouldn't list that if it's expired, honestly. Like something that's yeah, I don't know, that like really requires you to be like trained recently on it. I would maybe yeah, I don't know. I've never been asked this question about ex things that are expired, so I guess I don't really know the proper answer. Um, maybe you could list like CPR training 2016 or something, and then like the reader would maybe know that like, okay,
Yeah.
it's been a while. They would like, okay, CPR is just an example, but like you can maybe imagine other like like medical, like I'm thinking about like medical trainings because those like have like you don't want to show up somewhere and like say that you have it and then it be expired. But I think maybe if you put the year or something, it could be fine. And then obviously just like redo it if you need to before you go to grad school.
Yeah, I think adding the year, yeah, could be good. So then people can know like, okay, you did this year and then these are ongoing. Yeah. So I would say in that, yeah, if you want to include your certifications, yeah, I would add the year. Okay, and then could we talk a little bit more about how to get started on a CB? Like if you have a resume slash how you should transfer. So I don't think I've never really had a resume. So I'm not completely sure how to like transfer it, but one of my things that I would probably say is that like looking at if you just have a resume, like looking at the resume now and being like, okay, based on like the sections that we talked about like earlier about CVs, like maybe being like, okay, I can like pull this out of my resume, put it on my CV, probably expand on it more since CVs can be longer. I am currently, and Katie, you can also feel free to like say your thoughts too. I'm also in the process of like looking for a resource that kind of like gives more information about like how to turn resumes into CVs. Katie, I don't know if you've done that previously, but yeah.
Yeah, I did it like a while ago. And I think, I mean, the resume is so short, you really do end up adding a lot. So I wouldn't be too married to like what your resume looks like right now. Resumes have a lot of like action words and like not that CVs don't, but CVs are almost like a little bit more boring than resumes. I don't know if like that. Um, like I don't know. I feel like almost like the bullets from your resume should be on your CV, but almost like kind of at the end or something, like the end of that chunk. So like if you were like, I worked in this lab and your resume was like exemplified work ethic, and I haven't written one of these in a long time, so sorry if this is bad, by engaging in lit or doing literature reviews or blah blah blah, like you would really probably do like literature review line, data analysis line, and then at the end you could um maybe do some like work ethic line or something like that. So it's really just like so specific that it's almost you're just like taking that one line from your resume and kind of like breaking it into
Yeah.
3 lines. And yeah, it does look more boring because it's specific and longer, but like it's supposed to be like that. So I don't think anyone's really, I mean, the best thing that you can do to reduce boredom as someone is looking at your CV is just like get right to the point, as we said. Like that's the best thing that you can do. Um, yeah. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, in Transcripine, I looked up a CV template and all the information over to the appropriate sections. Yeah, I think that like plus one what Katie said, but also yeah, what was written in the chat about transferring a resume to a CV. Yeah, I would say anything that's like relevant or anything that's like kind of like similar to like the sections we talked about that were on your resume. Yeah, I would like move that over to your CV. I think also like yeah, how I got started since I didn't have a resume. At least I don't think I did. I don't remember ever making a resume, but at least I think how I got started, which was when I was an undergrad, I think I just like and I can maybe if I can look it up, I can maybe find it. But I think what I did is that I just like wrote out like I just thought about like throughout undergrad all the things that I did and like so any of the projects that I did, I kind of like went back and thought about like, okay, let me include like this. And then, like we said, anything related to education, you would include. And then thinking about like, was there any like awards or honors that I like feel like should be mentioned and just writing that. So yeah, and then any like we talked about leadership, volunteer, and all that stuff. Just basically like even just like going through like each year of like undergrad and just like writing out if you can remember if you can find the information just like writing out all the things that you did each year and being like okay this can be included in my CV in this way. So that's one thing that I would say while also like what was also said in the chat about looking up a CV template and then moving the information I think is also a really good idea. So does that help? Hope that helps. Okay. Yay. Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions, either about like general writing tips or about CV specifically? No.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll move on. Well, yeah, again, we'll have more, we'll have like, I think this is our last, is it our last section?
Yeah, I'm looking actually. Yeah, the next section is our last section, then we'll have some more time for Q&A.
Yeah, okay, cool. Sounds good. So now we'll move on to letters of rec. So who should you ask? You should ask people with whom you have conducted research or taken courses with. Um, you want to this click art. Sorry. You want to prioritize those who are in the field that you're pursuing, but it's okay, as we've already talked about, if that's not the case, if you're switching fields or it's not entirely relevant to what you're interested in. And gosh, sorry, like this thing. You should probably ask, you should probably prioritize the people that you've done research with, and then after that, you can then prioritize people that you've taken courses with. And it should probably be either like a recent course or maybe you've taken like more than one course with them. You'll kind of want to make sure that they've known you for a long time, or not a really long time, but they've known you for a good amount of time to really be able to get to know you, so they can really speak about who you are. So what are they going to talk about? And this will be like, you'll kind of help them discuss or you'll help them figure out what they should discuss. But also most letter writers kind of know what needs to be included already. So first thing is concrete examples of skills that you want to portray. So if you did research in someone's lab, you would kind of ideally want them to discuss things like your work ethic, your ability to pick up new skills, ability to think critically, kind of in the context of the projects that you worked on. And yeah, again, like concrete examples of when these things happened. Discussion of your ability to succeed in graduate school and beyond. And if needed, can give an outsider's perspective on a rough patch in your journey. So again, we kind of talked about this with personal statements. You can talk about this a little bit if you need to, but sometimes it's also nice if you, like, for instance, have a research mentor who can kind of say like, yeah, I kind of was there while they were going through this. It kind of explains, this bad grade on their transcript or whatever, but, I can vouch that, that like GPA or whatever doesn't really reflect them as a student or like a future researcher. When and how? So you want to ask your letter writers as far in advance as possible. So 6 weeks minimum, I think, is good because then it allows you to find other people if someone says no, which people say no sometimes, and it's usually not a reflection on you and more a reflection on like whether they feel they know you well enough. Often letter writers, especially if they're already in the research field or they're already professors, kind of know what people want to see, and it's very good for them actually to be honest with you up front about whether they think they'd be able to write you a positive letter. Um, if they say yes, and when they say yes, you'll have to ask them if they want reminders. And if so, remind them 2 weeks in advance and then 3 days before the deadline if by then they have not already turned it in. I ask about the reminders thing because some people, like I have a mentor who's incredibly organized, and reminders to her just like clog up her inbox. So she's just like, don't remind me of things. I got it. It's on my to-do list. But no one's perfect. So even those people you might want to remind 3 days before. I think 3 days is like, even for the people with strict to-do lists, is a good reminder. Yeah, so you'll want to send them everything they need to know to write the letter. You want to be organized so that it makes their life as easy as possible. So I usually just have like a sheet with the list of schools, program type, and due date. It's best for you to do it in like a Google Sheet document, I think, so that you can kind of keep updating things without having to like continuously send them a new document. Again, like clogging their inbox, and like professors get like 50 emails every 10 minutes. So like, you want to be really careful to not take up too much of their time or like brain space. Yeah, and then they might ask for a document outlining the work you did with them so they can more easily write the letter. This is totally fine and normal. Even if you know someone really well, they still might ask you to do this. Just as a reminder, again, people are really, really busy. They're not going to remember that really awesome thing you did last year. So you'll want to remind them. Yeah, I thought I was going to say something else about that. Oh yeah, even if they don't like explicitly ask for it, you might still want to send it anyway because like maybe they think they remember everything, but they don't. So I remember for all of my letter writers, except for one who had like written me a letter for something else kind of recently, I had sent them uh a document about what I did. And like for instance, I had an internship one summer and it was like the summer like a year before I was going to apply. So I kind of sent them a little document because it was like a while before I had even seen them. So yeah. So asking for letters like can feel a little bit awkward, but don't feel awkward because people get asked for letters all the time. My professors are constantly writing letters of recommendation for people. Um, you can do it via email or you can do it in person. Either one is fine, especially if you're like not in the same location as someone. But obviously you want to send a nice, respectful email or meet in person. And say something kind of along the lines of, I'm intending to apply to graduate school in the upcoming cycle. Would you be willing to write me a letter of recommendation? And like, would it be a good, positive letter of recommendation? And then in addition to all the things that we already have recommended that you send to people, you maybe should also ask them um, if there's anything else that can help the process be easier for them. So a few extra tips. So it's very important that the letters are turned in on time. This like may seem obvious and actually is we should say everything needs to be turned in on time. They're usually submission portals close on the due date. Um, but I will say, again, professors are not perfect and people in academia turn things in late all the time. Like it's actually just like a norm that people don't follow due dates in academia. So if your letter writer does not meet a deadline, and they are unable to submit, you can reach out to the school and ask if it can be turned in late, and often they will say, yes, I had a letter writer not turn in a letter on time, and I called the school and they were like, yeah, it's fine, you can just turn it in now. So some schools might care, but some schools might not, and you won't know unless you ask. So definitely ask. You don't want to be pulled out of the running because of someone else, forgot a responsibility that they had. Um, yeah, and then after the application cycle is over, update your writer on the outcome and send them a nice thank you email or letter. Yeah, you don't want to kind of just like ghost them because you want to keep that connection and you want to be a nice person and respectful. And yeah, I mean, I think like I once they sent in the letter, said thank you and like I sent a nice thank you letter, and then like a few months later after I um, had gotten into graduate school, I emailed them with the final outcome and said, thank you. And even if you don't get in, you still like absolutely need to thank them because they'll probably be letter writers if you try again or for whatever job you intend applying on or end up applying to. So keep in contact. It's always good to maintain connections. They may continue to be a resource for you as you progress through your career. So they might be letter writers later, but also, these people have a lot of experience in the field, and it's just good to have connections, especially with people that have known you for a long time and that you probably trust have a pretty good opinion of you. Um, So, yeah, that was pretty fast. Does anybody have any questions on letters of recommendation? Or anything? Because the next slide is just general Q&A time.
I have a follow-up question on the personal statement. It's like how detailed should we describe our research experience? Because the words is very limited. For example, like in one lab, I did a project, but along that, I also helped with something else, like hosting workshops or something like that. But that doesn't really tailored with my research skills, right? So I'm wondering, should I spend any other words to describe to mention that I hosted a workshop? Or I just write it in my CV and don't discuss it in my personal statement.
Did you say that that the workshops weren't really like relevant to your research? Yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily. It's a part of the research, but it's not relevant to my research skills. It's embedded in the research. It's a process, but doesn't necessarily emphasize you have a great research skills because I think anyone can do that.
Okay. Even though you said it's like not relevant, but it is embedded in the research, you maybe want to include it and maybe
Mm.
just not spend a lot of time on it. Or I guess, or you can like maybe like go ahead and write the statement. And then like if you like read through it and you're like, oh, I think it will really be like enhanced by including this, like about stuff about the workshops, then I would maybe include it. But yeah, if you feel like it's like sort of relevant, but not too relevant, and you don't necessarily want to take up space, I would maybe just include it in your CV alone. But Katie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it'll also kind of like, even though we're saying like you'll kind of have like a base version of all of your statements and then you'll tailor them to each school, it'll really like some schools allow for a lot of space. Like, for instance, if they're like, you can do like a 3-page single-spaced research statement up to that. You could totally fit it in there. That's hugely long. But some schools, I remember when I was actually applying to the school that I'm at right now, like the research statement was 2 pages double-spaced maximum. So everything that was like a full paragraph in my other version had been kind of like slimmed down significantly. So I would say like as you're kind of writing your base version, you can put it in there and then put it in there for now and then probably take it out. And yeah, don't spend too much time on it. You can spend like a sentence on it. Like kind of as I was saying earlier, I would start your first draft with everything you might possibly want to include because it's so easy to cut things out or like um, make things shorter while still kind of getting the same point across. And also, I'll say like leading workshops is very cool. It's not just something anybody could do. If it's absolutely related to the research and you're absolutely gaining skills by working with other people or teaching them things. So I would also like not downplay the significance of that experience too.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Very helpful.
Andrea, you can go.
Hi, yeah, I have a question regarding letters of recommendation. As an international student, my PIs asked me, about the general format, if there's a recommended length. I just didn't know what to say. Like, is a longer letter of recommendation better? Should it be like shorter? Do you have any tips?
Um, in terms of lengths of recommend, I in terms of length for letters of, I feel like this varies because I've seen like ones that were like, so for instance, like in grad school, like I've been on like the student academic affairs committee. So like this is not related to grad programs, but this is like when undergrads have like applied for awards. So I've like seen the like different lengths of like letters of rec that professors write. I've seen some do a couple paragraphs. I've seen some do a couple pages. I would say a page is probably like solid. Sometimes I feel like, unfortunately, like admissions committees, like if they see like only like two paragraphs and it might feel too short, and it's like, oh, like, well, couldn't they have like said more and stuff? So I would say a page, at least a page. I don't know, Katie, your thoughts, but I would say at least a page.
Yeah, I think that's good. And also there actually like there should be requirements. Like each program
Sometimes,
should
yeah.
actually say their
Mhm.
requirement. And yeah, if it is a page, like no one's like they really should fill out the whole page probably. And yeah, um I feel like longer being better. I think most programs try to control for that by making it only a page long. Definitely like don't tell them to fluff it up or anything like that, because then that just kind of looks weird. Definitely longer isn't better if it's not like saying anything extra. But yeah, if there's check the program requirements and then go from there. If like, I mean, I'm sure what often will happen is that like one of your programs will have a page minimum and maybe another one will have a two-page minimum, but like your letter writer's just going to submit the one page to everyone, which probably is just what happens with like most people. Um, so yeah, if they really are willing to spend a lot of time on it, they could have a short version and a long version, but that's like totally up to them and um is unnecessary, I think. I don't know. Just look at the requirements as the first step, I think.
Mhm.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
And then I have a mentor fit question. Can applicants apply to mentors? Sorry, can applicants apply to mentors who work with a family population if their research interest is a perfect fit to yours, even if your population of interest is adults? Yeah, I would probably say so. Yeah, I would say so. If the research fit is like really, really good, and it's like a perfect fit, yeah, I would do that. Because then you can say like in your, like we were talking about earlier, like about where to discuss gaps, or like where to discuss like what how you might want to like expand the person that you want to work with research. Like that's something that you can say like, not maybe not like this, but like just in general, you can be like, oh, like I want to work with this person to like expand their research on this topic with families, is specifically talking about like adults, whether that's adults within families or like adults like by themselves. Like, yeah, I would say if the fit is really, really good, I would I would go for it and mention that you'd want to work with them. I feel like um fit is most important, and when it comes to like populations that you're interested in, if it's this is more general, but like if it's a population that like the person doesn't necessarily work with. So for instance, like one of the new students in one of my labs, our advisor mainly does work with like teens and adults, but she wants to do work with kids. And that's totally fine. Like she's not working with the person, it's totally fine, but one of her other advisors does work with kids. But yeah, I think it's totally fine if the research interest is really good, but even if the population of interest is not quite the same, I feel like it's okay. Because like families versus adult, I feel like it's okay. Unless it's like the population is completely, completely different. It could still probably work, but I think it depends on if the advisor feels like they can advise you if the population's different. I would say, Katie, I don't know if you have
Yeah,
other.
I think that's yeah. You'll still, I'm sure once you're in when you're in someone's lab, you'll still have to do like some of the work probably that they're already doing, but as long as you're fine with that, I think you can definitely write that in your statement. Wu Young, you want to go?
Yeah, I want to ask you about the SOP and personal statement essay and letters of recommendation. Like those three things are the ones that we have to submit, and I'm sure it's all related, but I was wondering, as like professors reviewing the application, what do you think is the most important, like, or like, which one we should highlight the most?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So research statement, personal statement, letters of rec. I feel like this is almost a cop-out answer, and I'm so sorry because I was gonna say I feel like all of them are important, and
Yeah.
I think I was gonna yeah, like this is a cop-out answer, but I think all of them are important. Obviously, like the statement of purpose slash research statement and the personal statement is like you're like that's in your control because like you're writing it, but like the letters of rec, this is why like when Katie said to act for strong letters of rec that like that helps because obviously like you can't necessarily control what letter writers write. I will say. Um, yeah, I will say I think they're all important. If I had to say one that's most important, I am kind of leaning a little bit to saying letters of recommendation only because like I think it's helpful to be able to talk about the work that you've done and like say it in your own words. But I do also find it helpful if like a letter writer can like back up things that you said and like really talk about your promise and potential. I will say when I applied for programs, there was one program that I got into and my would have been advisors mentioned to me like offhand that my letters of rec were really strong. So I don't know. Again, cop out answer. I think they're all really important. If I had to say one, I'm leaning a little bit to say letters of recommendation, but then on the other hand, like you want your research statement to be strong and like personal statement, especially like the research statement, because it's like I think admissions committees want to know that you're able to like discuss and talk about your past research experience and also be able to talk in pretty good detail about what you want to do after. So yeah, all are important, but I'm leaning more towards saying letters of brag. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, yeah, that's a really hard question. I think, because yeah, I think it's definitely, well, here, yeah, caveat is like put 100% of your effort into all of them. Like, don't let this make you not work as hard on one of them. I would say for letters of rec, like if you're applying, really soon, that work is like technically already done, right? Like your letter of rec work for you was just putting in the time with that mentor or that professor for the past year, couple years, right? And then all you have to do is ask them, and then it's on them to write it and turn it in, right? So in terms of what you're spending a lot of your time and effort on, I would definitely say, yeah, the research statement um, is really important because it's really it's really where you tell them about like a lot of the things that they care about in terms of what you want to do with your research and who you want to work with. Personal statement is often like super narrative driven and it like really amazingly creative people write amazing personal statements, which couldn't be me. And sometimes really amazing, competent future researchers write a boring personal statement and it's okay. And then, yeah, at that point, I think the research statement speaks a lot. I will say if the personal statement is more of like a diversity statement, I would say that that needs to be really strong. So yeah, I think that like another thing that I want to point out too is that like sometimes people who are really competent and have a lot of potential just won't have like the most amazing letters of rec. In that instance, I think readers would really look at the research statement. So I feel like if I had to pick two, it would be the research statement in conjunction with the letter writer.
Yeah, I would, yeah. Again, all of them, if all of them can be strong, that's great. But yeah, that's and I going this is like sort of related, but like going back to what Katie said about earlier about like letters of rec in terms of asking for a strong one and a good one. When I applied, I was like a strong and positive one because sadly and unfortunately, I've seen stories and heard of stories where professors write really shitty letters of rec for students, which I feel like is so terrible because like just say no if you think you're gonna write a bad one. And I do know that like bad letters of rec tend to not be great, to not to be viewed greatly, even though like it's not your fault. Like again, the professor should have just said no. But hopefully that doesn't happen to anyone. And they're all strong. You don't have to like worry about that. But yeah, like we said before, like agreeing with Katie, I would say research statement and letters of rec. Also, I just looked at the time. We're 2 minutes past when we're supposed to end. Katie, I don't know if you have to run, but I can stay on for a couple more minutes if folks have more questions. Um, but for folks who have to go, thank you all for being here. This was great. But if you have any other questions, again, I can stay on for a bit more if folks have other questions.
Maybe we can try maybe we can try like 2 more questions if
Yeah.
anyone has
Mhm.
them. But also, yeah, like your mentors are a good resource. Our emails are on the slide. Yeah.
Actually, do we have our emails?
Oh, do we not have our emails?
I think so. I was like, wait, do we have our emails there? Maybe.
Oops.
Okay. Well, hold on. I can write that in the chat if.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Here,
maybe
I'll
we should.
put mine and you can put yours.
Okay. Um. Yeah, I will. He's like, oh, we should. Oops. Um.
Yes, Vivian, you can reach out if you need anything.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Anyone, if y'all have any questions, please do reach out. I know applying is a very scary and not fun process. So yeah, if you have any questions, please let us know. But yeah, does anyone have any questions that they want to ask right now? We can stay on for like 2, 3 more minutes.
I actually have one question.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you to Katie about like NYU SOP because you said NYU SOP is like 2 pages with double space. So it's like given that it's such a short like pages, like how did you manage to write, especially mentioning your PI and their interest in the last part?
Yeah, it was like it was like crazy short. Also, I realized later, like, yeah, especially so you're at NYU, so you can like talk to people if you are interested in applying to NYU. Um, and we can talk about it more. I realized that some people just were like, "Oh yeah, I'm not doing I'm not doing double space, I'm doing single space," and like they just put more. I think following the instructions is good. But yeah, I like had my base one that I had written already, like as we were kind of talking about, where you have like your base your base statements that you kind of tweak. And then I just like really crunched it and it was really it didn't read amazingly, honestly. But I got the point across and I'm at NYU now, so it worked. But I mean, Wu Young's my mentee. So if you want to apply to NYU, we can work on that together. I think it's a horrible decision on their part to have such a short statement or such a short research statement. But we can definitely work on that. And like anyone who stuck to the word limit was a little bit, it was just a little bit choppy for everybody. And I saw it with like the next applicants and stuff too. But we'll figure it out if you're planning to apply to NYU. And this is the NYU Psych Department specifically. I don't think they do this in the other areas. So
Thank you, thank
Anyone else? Last question.
all right, I feel like
I don't know. It's like
anybody? All
no,
right, I
no.
feel like
I didn't say that. I'm sorry. I kind of have a question. If you guys still have time, if not, it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my question was, first of all, I'm really sorry for coming late. My question was more kind of about, I don't know if anyone can answer this, but I kind of wanted to ask like the audience more. I missed a lot of the like personal statement part of the lecture, which is what I kind of came here for. So does anyone have like just an important point that they took away that maybe that would help me? I'm sorry.
Um, yeah, so we can, and again, we'll like you'll get sent these slides like later so you can like see all the stuff that we include the personal statement stuff. But yeah, I would say just like one takeaway point, or I guess a couple. One is to it's called a personal statement, but like don't make it necessarily overly personal and like really try to think about like all the things that you would want to include, like your personal reasons and personal background for like related to why you want to pursue a grad degree is what you want to focus on. And then one of the things I think we mentioned was like kind of like maybe workshopping some things you can might want to do this with like your project short mentor or other folks about like, hey, like I want to include this in my project, not my project short. I want to include this in my personal statement. Is this too personal or is this, okay? So yeah, that would be like general and also like trying to, if you're going to talk about, which I don't actually know if I said this when I was doing this section, but if you want to talk about, similar experiences to what you talked about in your research statement, I would more so emphasize like a little bit more of the personal aspect. I think when I applied, I think there were some things that overlapped with my research and personal statement, but I tried to emphasize different aspects of the experiences more than others. And then, yeah, I would say those are the main things. And then again, like you'll get these slides so you can see like other stuff that we talked about. But yeah, I think those are like the main tips and stuff that helps.
And the recording will also be like on YouTube at some point. So
Yeah.
you can just like go watch the first part too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize there would be a recording, but thank you so, so much for answering that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. All right. There's like, I think 5 folks left. Does anyone last questions before we head out? Okay. I think we might be good.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, thank you all again for attending. This has been really great. So like Katie just mentioned, like the recording will be up uh probably sometime soon. I'm gonna send it to Sarah, who's like the director of programming for Project Short, so that she can post it on YouTube. And then you will also get the slides. But yeah, if you have any other questions that you didn't get to ask, Katie and I both put our emails in the chat, so you can feel free to email us. But yeah. And with that, I hope you all have a great rest of the day or rest of the morning, depending on where you are. But yeah, thank you all again for coming.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Bye, thank
Leon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.